Good evening and welcome to the third annual Bay Area Climate Forum. My name is Bianca Chiaramento and I manage the Bay Area Climate Change Council. BACC is a broad-based collaborative of existing organizations that have come together to catalyze climate action in Hamilton and Burlington. We are supported by the two cities and administratively housed at Mohawk College. On behalf of BACC and all of our member organizations, thank you for joining us tonight. Our event hashtag, BACC Forum 2021, exists to centralize conversations about tonight's event. Please join the conversation on Twitter and tag us at BayArea_climate. We have an exciting program ahead, but before we dive in, we wish to recognize that our work takes place in the traditional Indigenous territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Six Nations of the Grand River, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We also want to take a brief moment to thank all of our sponsors. Without our sponsors, tonight would not be possible. We thank you for supporting climate action in our community. The Bay Area Climate Change Council spans the cities of Hamilton and Burlington. We recognize that our region is inextricably linked through geography, through commerce, and through our shared recognition of the climate crisis. BACC benefits from municipal support. We work closely with municipal governments to achieve their respective emission targets. In the spirit of tonight's events, here's a message from the Mayor of Burlington, Mary Ann Mead Ward.
Hello everyone, I'm Burlington Mayor Mary Ann Mead Ward, and I'd like to welcome you to the Bay Area Climate Forum. Despite the many challenges that we have encountered together over the past year, we have not stopped working on the challenges to respond to the climate emergency. Together, we achieved some very important milestones this past year, including the passage of our Climate Action Plan on April 20th to help our community transition away from the use of fossil fuels. We also launched the Integrated Mobility Plan and are working on a cycling plan update to develop a more sustainable transportation model and give our residents choices for how they want to get around the city. We also partnered for the Center for Climate Change Management at Mohawk College to develop a deep energy retrofit program for homeowners. We know that the city cannot address climate change alone. We rely on our partnerships with the Bay Area Climate Change Council and all of our partners in the community to join us in leading climate action. Thank you for attending and enjoy tonight's event.
We also received a message from the Mayor of Hamilton, Fred Eisenberger.
Hello everyone, I'm Hamilton Mayor Fred Eisenberger and I'd like to welcome you all to the Bay Area Climate Change Forum hosted by the Bay Area Climate Change Council. This is a very important collaboration between the cities of Hamilton and Burlington and Mohawk College with objectives to address and accelerate climate change action on a regional scale. Hamilton has worked to achieve a 43% reduction in corporate greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency, transit conversion, to compressed natural gas and has begun purchasing personal electric fleet vehicles. However, the cities cannot solve the climate emergencies on their own. This collaboration with the full support of both cities can help build capacity and momentum at the community level to help both cities fight climate change. I encourage everyone to stay involved and do your part because every action counts in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building resiliency to tackle climate change. Thank you to the Bay Area Climate Change Council and everyone in attendance. I hope this forum gives you ample opportunity to learn about and explore our local Bay Area climate change priorities and solutions.
BACC is grateful for the support that each city provides. It allows us to do the important work of catalyzing climate action in our region. Beyond the regional level, there is major work to be done to tackle climate change at the provincial level. We're joined tonight by Ontario's Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Since being elected, the Honourable Jeff Yurek has held various positions in government, including Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry, Minister of Transportation, and now as Minister of the Environment. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome, Minister Yurek.
Thank you very much, Bianca, for that introduction, and good evening, everybody. And I want to thank the Bay Area Climate Change Council and Mohawk College for inviting me to speak at tonight's forum. I know that the council has set an ambitious target of making Hamilton and Burlington zero carbon by 2050, and our government is committed to helping all Ontarians do their part to reduce the province's greenhouse gas emissions. The Made in Ontario Environment Plan is our government's blueprint to protect air, land, and water, reduce litter and waste, and adapt to the effects of climate change. This ever-evolving plan commits Ontario to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And we're already well on our way towards meeting that target. Our province's emissions have decreased significantly since 2005, and almost all of Canada's progress towards its 2030 Paris Agreement target has been driven by Ontario. The biggest action Ontario has taken on climate change to date is eliminating coal-fired electricity. It was the biggest greenhouse gas reduction initiative in Canadian history and made Ontario the first North American jurisdiction with a significant reliance on coal to cease coal-fired power generation. Moving forward, we are supporting the efforts of Ontario's industries to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by reducing and phasing out their use of coal. We are building on a number of our achievements in a number of ways. One of the key initiatives included in our plan is the Emissions Performance Standards Program, which will hold large emitters accountable for the greenhouse gas emissions with a system that is tough but fair, cost-effective, and flexible to the needs and circumstances of our province. The federal government has accepted our program as an alternative to the federal output-based pricing system, and it covers the same facilities. Compliance with this program will help drive capital investments in innovative, low-carbon solutions at the sector and facility levels. We are working now with the federal government to ensure a smooth transition for industry and a clear understanding around the compliance requirements. We have also a new cleaner transportation fuels regulation that requires fuel suppliers to increase the renewable content in gasoline to 15% by 2030. It is estimated that this
to share some of the work that BACC has been doing to catalyze climate action in our community. BACC is focused on making sure that Hamilton and Burlington are thriving net zero communities by 2050. We know this is no small feat, and we're taking a targeted approach. The three biggest sources of emissions in our community are industry, buildings, and transportation, accounting for 95% of overall emissions. If we have any hope of meeting our targets, we need to include measures that directly tackle emissions in the big three. When it comes to transportation, nearly 20% of our region's emissions come from burning gasoline and diesel in our cars, SUVs, trucks, and light freight shipping. We can shift this number in two ways. One, by changing the modal split for passenger trips to lower carbon options like walking, biking, and public transit. And two, by transitioning all vehicles to zero carbon. As part of our big data initiative, we'd like to see Hamilton and Burlington use data to make sense of how people are moving and to reduce emissions. We're in the process of consulting technology experts to know what's possible, while also consulting a diverse set of community voices to understand what's needed to improve low carbon forms of transportation. When all is said and done, we'll be providing clear guidelines to the cities, instructing them how to use big data to reduce emissions and make sure our transportation systems serve the needs of everyone. How about the building sector? Nearly 18% of our region's emissions come from heating, cooling, and powering our homes and commercial buildings. Life isn't getting any cheaper. We know that homeowners will need help if we expect them to complete what can be an expensive retrofit process. That's why we're working on a retrofit program design. BACC is looking to help the cities of Hamilton and Burlington establish programs to financially support residents who are willing to retrofit their home. We're also looking at the network of contractors, suppliers, and energy experts that we'll need to support mass retrofits in our region. As far as industrial emissions go, they account for 60% of Bay Area greenhouse gas emissions. Without significant, deep cuts in industrial emissions, our climate targets will not be met. That said, how we address industrial emissions in our communities matter. If, for example, a major manufacturer leaves the Bay Area for another jurisdiction, the Bay Area's industrial emissions will drop, but the overall climate impact on the global level remains unchanged. This is referred to as carbon leakage. to have any impact whatsoever on global climate change, emission reductions need to be a reflection of local reductions, not industrial flight. To address carbon leakage, we're working to help local industry access government funding to achieve deep emission reductions in our region. This is not an exhaustive list. If you'd like to stay informed on these initiatives and the other work that we have moving forward, you can follow us on social media at Bay Area_climate. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can sign up to our e-newsletter. It's time to get on with the main event. But first, a note from our sponsors.
Sustainability at Electra means empowering our customers, communities, and employees, protecting the environment, and embracing innovation to meet today's needs and the needs of future generations. Electra believes in building a sustainable future, and we're a proud sponsor of the Bay Area Climate Forum.
Tonight, we are joined by Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Katharine is an atmospheric scientist and award-winning communicator. You may recognize her from her viral TED Talk on climate change. She was recently appointed Chief Scientist at the Nature Conservancy, known in Canada as Nature United. Katharine is from Etobicoke, but she teaches public policy and law at Texas Tech University. She hosts the PBS digital series Global Weirding, and she has been named one of Time's 100 most influential people. Tonight, Katharine will be speaking about overcoming the barriers to public acceptance of climate impacts and solutions. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Katharine Hayhoe to the Bay Area Climate Forum. Welcome, Katharine.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today. A little bit of home since I'm from West Toronto, and we are going to be talking to each other. So in the link in the chat right now, I put a link to pollev.com/Katharine, my name, and I will go ahead and share my screen with you too so you can see it here. Go to pollev.com/Katharine. And when you get there, you will see a question for you. My first question to you is this. It's an easy one. Where are you joining from today? What you need to do is click on this map. And if you're not in Ontario, that's not a problem at all. You can click outside. So if you're joining in from the States, you can click down below. If you're joining from, Eastern Canada, click to the left, Western Canada to the right. Go ahead and tell me where you're joining from today. And just for reference, I apologize that the red dot here on the map is not Burlington, it's actually Guelph because this is the only map I could find. All right, it looks like we've got a lot of people in the Bay Area, but we have people as far down as the tip of Southern Ontario. We've got people around by Niagara Falls and St. Catharines area. Okay, great. It looks like everybody's getting the hang of this. So this is the way you're going to be able to ask me questions at the end. So don't lose this link. And in fact, we got some people from Northern Ontario too. That's great. Now I'm going to ask you a little bit harder question. And this question you have to answer with a word. Ready? The question is, describe what you do in one word. What do you do? If you really absolutely have to cheat and do two words, make sure that you put a dot or a dash in between them because this is a Wordle, so the words have to go together. All right, so we've got people who educate, do engineering, excellent, collaboration, SciComm, sustainability, housing, people who write, and people who are retired, people who teach. Oh, I love that, nurture and inspire and help. I love those, that's your main job description. Excellent. So it looks like we've got a lot of people who do education and engineering who are listening, people who do sustainability, coordination, people who do research too, people who do climate and conservation. Excellent. Oh, ecology. People who do life. Yes, I think that's a good description of what we all do. Excellent. I wanted to get a sense of who people were, where you're coming from, and now you know how to use this tool. So I am a climate scientist. That is literally what I am. How do you get to be a climate scientist? Well, you specialize in studying some area of the climate system. You can study the atmosphere, the ocean, the cryosphere, which is ice. You can study the lithosphere, which is geology. You can study the biosphere, which is ecology. And I specifically studied atmospheric science. So I'm an atmospheric or a climate scientist. Now, when it comes to climate change, You are literally speaking to the horse, so to speak. You know how you say people want to hear something directly from the horse's mouth? Well, in this case, this is what you are hearing. I am a climate scientist. I study the climate system. And here's what we know in 1 minute. We know that climate is changing, not only because of thermometers and satellite records, but because we have 26,500 independent lines of evidence around the whole world, whether it's trees blooming earlier, glaciers melting, sea level rising, ice season on the lakes getting shorter, insects or pests moving poleward. We have 26,500 indicators telling us that yes, the planet is warming. We also know that it's humans. Why? Because since the 1800s, we've been carefully checking every other thing it could be. Volcanoes, natural cycles, the sun, even unknown factors. And today we scientists are, and this is a legitimate number from a scientific study, we are 99.999% sure. It doesn't get any more sure than that. What else do we know? We know it's bad. As they say where I live in Texas, real bad. How bad? Well, if climate change continues unchecked, we could see a COVID magnitude economic recession on average every year by the end of the century. A new study just came out showing that the tropics could get so hot and humid that some parts of it could be uninhabitable due to the soaring humidex. We know that carbon dioxide levels on our planet have not been this high in 15 million years. And if you want to go back to the time of the dinosaurs did great back then, humans not so much. We know that we're conducting an unprecedented experiment with the planet, putting more carbon into the atmosphere faster than any time in the history of the planet as far back as we can go. And the question is not, will the planet survive? It will. The question is, will we? So that's the science in a nutshell. And at this point, you might be asking, well, why on earth are we not doing anything about it? And in fact, going back to my screen here, the expression that I often have, the internal expression is this. If it's this bad and this unprecedented, why are we not acting? Often, when we look at survey results, we think, well, it's because not enough people understand the science. So this asks, is the Earth getting warmer? And you show results from across Canada by writing. And we can see that not everybody understands what scientists have known for over 100 years, which is that the planet is getting warmer. So we think, well, maybe we just need more science. And we go down to the States. I have results for both Canada and the States, and I'll show you both alternately because I have a little bit more for the States and for Canada. So I want to kind of show you how we are running along parallel tracks. When you see 30% of people in the US don't even think that it's getting warmer, and in Canada it's just under 20%, we think surely they just need more information. And when we go to the scientific literature, we have a lot of information. If you go to Google Scholar, we have 2.6 million scientific studies on climate change. We have 11,000 scientists, including me, writing letters telling people that we have a climate emergency. We have scientists who've been studying this since the 1800s. These are the real pictures of the real scientists who discovered that digging up and burning coal and gas and oil is releasing heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around our planet, and that's why it's running a fever. This is literally how long we've known. So we often think, and this is one of my global weirding episodes from that I do with PBS in the States on YouTube. If you're interested, you can actually see our PBS series at globalweirdingseries.com if somebody wants to drop that link in the chat. One of our most popular episodes is if I just tell people the facts, surely they'll change their mind, right? But this is where we have to go from the physical science to the social science. And when we do that, this is what we learn. George Lakoff is a cognitive linguist, and he's looked at this for a very long time. And just to summarize what he says in one of his books, he says, we have been taught a false and outdated theory of reason that facts alone will set you free. Now, facts matter enormously. Of course they do. You can't say that I don't believe in gravity and step off the cliff. If you do, you're going down. It doesn't matter what you said. But he said, facts matter enormously, but to be meaningful, they must be framed in terms of their moral importance. If facts don't fit the frames in our brain, the frames stay and the facts go. So how does this relate to climate change? Well, in the United States, a year ago, February 2020, this was the situation. Of course, in the US, they have two political parties, so you can make nice two-dimensional figures like this. And what you're looking at here is a list of the most politically polarized issues in the United States. The width of the gray bar shows how polarized it is. The wider the gray bar, the more divided people are politically on an issue. And what's up at the top? Climate change. So then, of course, COVID happened, right? And COVID is like a tidal wave overwhelming us. We got the recession behind it, and we still have climate change coming up after that. And unfortunately, COVID rapidly became politicized. In the United States today, the number one predictor of whether someone is planning to get vaccinated or not is simply where they fall on the political spectrum. And so it's no surprise that when they redid that study I just showed you last August, this time they're not ranked in the order of the width of the gray bar. So I'm going to show you what are the top three. The third most politicized issue was the COVID outbreak. Number two was race and ethnic inequality. And number one was still climate change. And what happens when things are so politically polarized? Social scientist Dan Kahan has an answer, and I'm going to translate this into English. Being smarter does not make us more accepting of science per se. It just makes us better able to out-argue the devil. In other words, we can cherry pick the YouTube videos and the websites and the one expert over there in the corner of a country who shows that they agree with us. We are better able to pick the information that shows we're right, the smarter we are. So here in Canada, when we say, is the earth getting warmer, and we look at the pattern of who agrees with the science, what does this pattern remind us of? I don't know about you, but it reminds me of this. What is this? These are the 2019 election results. Yes. In the United States, where you fall on the political spectrum is the number one predictor, not only if you're going to get vaccinated, but what you think about 200 years of climate science. And I'm sorry to say that in Canada, we are not that far behind. We are, thank goodness, a little behind, but not that far. And in fact, this happens in countries around the world. Across 56 nations, climate change beliefs, education and climate change beliefs, education and experience were dwarfed by political ideology and worldview. So it didn't matter how educated you were, what mattered was your political ideology. And what they found across 64 countries, this study just came out in October, when people who are liberal are more educated, they get more concerned about climate change. But when people who are conservative get more educated, it makes less of a difference. And in the US, it actually moves people in the opposite direction. So more information about the science is not what's going to fix it. And I'm sorry to say that this is one of my, I can't really say favorite cartoons, but this is sort of one of my most understood cartoons of the last year, where you have COVID doctors saying, as long as we just provide the facts to the American people, surely they'll change their minds. And then we have the climate scientists over here saying, yeah, we've tried that for 30 years and look how well it worked. So at this point, you too may feel like this. What are we supposed to do with this situation if providing simple facts that we've known for 150 years are not enough to change people's minds? What we need to do is we need to recognize the real problems. So rather than believing that the problem is lack of education or lack of intelligence or lack of science, we have to understand the real problems. The real problems are something called psychological distance and something else called solution aversion. Let me explain what these are. In fact, let me actually illustrate what these are. Let's start with psychological distance. Psychological distance is the concept that you think of climate change as a distant or far off issue that doesn't matter to you. So in the United States, and I told you earlier, I have some of these figures for Canada, but not all. So I'm kind of going back and forth, and wherever I have ones for Canada, I will show you those too. My point though is we're not that different. Our numbers are just a little bit higher, but we show the same trends. So they asked people across the United States by county here, what you're looking at is by county, do you think global warming will harm plants and animals? And most people said yes. Then they said, do you think it will harm future generations? So plants and animals, not people, future generations, not us. People said yes. Do you think it will harm people in developing countries? So not here, but over there. People said yes. Do you think it will harm people here in the United States? You can see it's starting to get a little bluer, right? There's a little less people saying yes. And then they ask this question, do you think it will harm you personally? All of a sudden, the whole country goes blue, except for a few counties in Texas and New Mexico, where the most concerned people about climate change live. Who are those people? Hispanic Catholics. We'll get into that in a different talk. But I'll just say that white Catholics are actually least concerned about climate change. So it isn't the Pope that's driving this, it's politics. That's just a side note. We also have this result for Canada. And although the colors are slightly different, you can see that our numbers have dropped precipitously. We were at 83% of people in Canada saying that yes, global warming is real. And all of a sudden we're down to 47% of people saying that it will affect people in real life. This is a huge gap. This gap, more than 30%, this gap is psychological distance. We think it's real, but we don't think it matters to us. We think it matters to the polar bear living in the Arctic, and of course it does, but we don't think it matters to us living in Hamilton, Burlington, GTA, anywhere across Canada. Psychological distance is when we view an issue as being distant in time, the future, not now, distant in space, over there, not here, abstract, global temperature rather than stronger downpours and crazy heat waves and a shorter lake ice season and all that, and irrelevant to our concerns. It's about the polar bears and the icebergs. It's not about our health, our safety, what's happening where we live. The reality, of course, is that rather than it being the polar bear on the metaphorical iceberg, we humans are the ones on the iceberg too. We are just as at risk as the polar bears. We just have to open our eyes and realize it. Why do we care about climate change? We care about it not because we intrinsically care about a 1 or 2 or 3 degree increase in the average temperature of the entire planet. We care about climate change because it affects literally our water, our food, the safety of our homes, our insurance rates, our economy, our jobs, our health. It affects everything we already care about. Another way to put it is this. I don't think climate change needs to be on anyone's priority list. Yes, you heard that right. And you might think, hang on a second, you said you were a climate scientist. I don't think climate change needs to be on anyone's priority list. Why? Because the only reason we care about climate change is because it affects everything already at the top of our personal priority lists today. Let me give you my examples, and then I'm actually going to ask for yours. Why do I care about climate change? Oops, where did I? Shoot, I missed that part. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Sorry. Second thing though, before I get to there, I want to introduce solution aversion. What is solution aversion? Solution aversion is the idea that we don't like the proposed solution, but if I say it's a real problem and I don't want to fix it, that makes me a bad person, right? I mean, if somebody said, oh, sure, it's a huge problem, but I don't want to fix it, you'd be like, oh, what a jerk, right? So instead, what we do, because we don't like the solution, is we have to reject the reality of the problem itself, because that's what our defense mechanisms require to placate our conscience and to make us believe that yes, we are a good person. Did you follow that? We reject a problem, not because we actually have a problem with the science, but because we have a problem with the solution. But in order to reject the solution and still be able to be a good person in our own eyes, we have to say it isn't a real problem. So in Canada, when we say, is the earth getting warmer partly or mostly because of human activity? So is it getting warmer because of us? And you'll notice how the numbers here have dropped a lot from is it real? 83% say it's real, 60% say it's humans. And of course, we scientists are 99.999% sure it is humans, right? Now I want to show you another map. Do you support carbon pricing? So this is almost the same map. If you go back and forth, it's almost exactly the same map. It's just a little bit lighter color. There is a direct correlation between solution aversion and do you think this is real? Direct. And in fact, as a German economist wrote in this really interesting book, he said, food and energy markets were always coupled until the Industrial Revolution. And because fossil fuels brought us tremendous productivity, tremendous benefits, for the first time, we humans were actually able to have the leisure to travel, to have education, to have energy provide our resources. But he goes on to say, the problem is isn't that people want to do the wrong thing. None of us really wants to do the wrong thing. We operate in an economic system that doesn't present us with the real cost of our decisions. And that's what a carbon price is designed directly to address, to allow us to recognize the real cost of our decisions. Because that failure so far, up until this point, according to Sir Nicholas Stern's commission in the UK, which was about 10 years ago, it is the greatest market failure ever. So that is why we need solutions. So what do we do about the problem of solution aversion and psychological distance? Well, this is Chris. I like to show you pictures of people, or at least pictures of their books. Chris works at my university in Texas Tech, and he studies media and communication. He has done some really interesting studies showing that when we bring climate change close to us, talking about how it's not in the future, it's now, it's not over there, it's here, it's not abstract, it's concrete, it's not irrelevant, it's relevant. When we bring climate change here, not only does it decrease psychological distance, obviously, but it also decreases our political polarization. It's like a twofer. By bringing climate change local and by talking about local impacts and local solutions like the Bay Area is doing, that actually can diffuse a lot of the political polarization we see at the national scale. And when I say at the national scale, I mean at the national scale in Canada, not just the US. So what can you do about it? Interestingly, the solution starts with these maps. We left off with the map of people who don't think it matters to us personally, right? But there's a darker blue map. I don't have this one for Canada, but I imagine we're pretty similar. Remember, we're pretty similar on this. So 43% of people in the US don't think it will affect them personally, and 47% of people in Canada don't think it will affect them personally. But there's a darker blue map, and the darker blue map is this one. We never talk about it. And here's the thing. If we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we ever do anything about it, right? So we need to talk about it. Why don't we? We don't think it matters to us, and we don't think there's anything positive we can do to fix it. So when climate changes and we get worried about it, often what we do is the wrong thing. What's the wrong thing? We dump more scary information about polar bears and icebergs on people. And believe me, I am a scientist and I can dump scary information with the best of them. If you feel any lack of scary information, I can give you a list. So we dump scary information on people, and what happens? People don't feel like it matters to them personally, and they don't feel like there's anything we can do to fix it. So we reject that information even more, and inaction results. As a neuroscientist, Tali Sharot says, she says, Fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw and to freeze and to give up rather than taking action. Instead, we need to talk about why and how climate change matters to us and all the positive things we can do to fix it. That's what we need to talk about. What type of things can we begin our conversation with? Something we agree on rather than something we disagree on. What can we agree on? We can agree on the place we live. We can agree on we're both parents. We might agree on a shared faith, or we're a member of the same type of club, the Rotary Club. We might agree that we enjoy the same activity, birding or hiking or paddling. We care, and this is where I was going before, we care because of who we are. So I want to kind of go through why I care, what my top priorities are on my personal list, which climate change affects every single one of. And then I'm going to ask you in one word on polev.com, I'm going to ask you what's one word, the top word on your priority list, why you care about climate change. So obviously I care because I'm a scientist and this is what I study, but I also care because I'm Canadian. I care because I live in Texas, which is the most vulnerable state in the United States to climate change impacts. I care because I love the snow and outdoor sports. I care because I'm a mom and I would do anything as a mom for my kids and their future. And I care because I'm a Christian and I believe that we are to care for every living thing on this planet, including our fellow humans. So give me one word here, just in one word. And if you have to cheat, use a dot or a dash to join them. I care about climate change because I am a what? Who are you that makes you care about climate change, and how does it affect you? All right, we got a lot of parents here. Absolutely. I care about it because I am a what? I am a mom, a parent, a father, a grandparent, a teenager, a grandma. I care about it because I'm a student, because I'm a scientist, because I'm an engineer, because I believe in justice, because I belong to a community, because I am somebody who cares about health or the environment, I'm kind, I'm a farmer or a gardener. I love this, and this is exactly what we need to see. Do you see? What do you see here? It's not one word, it's many different words. And what that means is whoever you already are is the perfect person to care. And whoever somebody else already is the perfect person to care. Isn't that kind of revolutionary? Whoever someone is, they're already the perfect person to care. And if they don't think they care, it's simply because they have not connected the dots. You don't have to change who someone is. You just have to explain to them how they already care. That's a very different and much easier thing to do. So once we've identified that, then we say, how is climate change affecting us in ways that matter to us? And if you go to PoleEV now, you can start putting in your questions to me, okay? We're going to be taking your questions in 2 minutes here. So you can go ahead to PoleEV and you can put your questions in there now. And the really fun thing is you can upvote the questions that you most want me to answer, because I might not be able to get to all of them. In fact, I probably won't. So if you put questions in Zoom, go ahead and go over to PoleEV now and put your question there. You can write a whole question with the question mark at the end. And the fun thing is you can upvote the questions you want me to answer. So even if you don't have a question, go to PoleEV and upvote the one that you most want me to answer. But we can talk about how climate change affects us if we live in the Maritimes, with hurricanes getting stronger, pushing further north. If we live out west with wildfires burning greater area. If we live up in the north with permafrost thawing. If we live in southern Ontario with what? Well, we've got deer ticks spreading Lyme disease because our cold winters aren't enough to keep them at bay anymore. We've got increased flooding. We've got crazy heat waves. People are having to install air conditioning in homes that never had it before. We are seeing things happen right here in the places where we live, here and now. It's not on the other side of the world. It's not in the future. It is now, and it affects our kids. It affects our health. It affects the economy. It affects our jobs. It affects the things we love doing and the places we love to go. It affects every aspect of our lives already today. Then we have to talk about what solutions look like. And there's so many examples. There's energy solutions, like we've got Warren Buffett building a giant wind farm in Alberta. That's pretty cool. Or we've got organizations like Iron Plus Earth that are retraining people in the oil and gas industry to work in clean energy, upskilling. I love that word. We've got all kinds of other solutions, like technological solutions with electric vehicles, old school solutions like hydropower, new school solutions like sucking carbon out of the air and turning it into carbon neutral fuel, and policy solutions like getting money back on our taxes from the carbon pricing. I even talk about solutions in Texas. Texas has the biggest army base in the US, no surprise, but you might not know that it's 43% powered by wind and solar energy. 23% of all of the electricity in Texas comes from wind already. Texas has the first carbon neutral airport in North America, the DFW airport in Dallas-Fort Worth, and Houston is the center of oil and gas production in the US, and they have a climate plan just like the Bay Area, and they're going to be meeting their Paris targets. Amazing. At the global scale, Project Drawdown, if you want to put a link to that in the chat, it is just drawdown.org. They have over 100 amazing solutions, which sure, they include solar, and yes, they include wind, but they also include efficiency and coastal wetland protection and nature-based solutions. There's amazing solutions that we can learn about and share. And I love talking about how clean energy is revolutionizing the lives of more than 1 billion people who don't have access to electricity. Last year, during COVID, 90% of new electricity installed around the world, many of it in countries that don't have coal or gas or oil resources, 90% was clean energy. And we can also talk about preparation for climate impacts, adaptation, updating our infrastructure, making our agriculture more resilient, redesigning our cities, protecting our ecosystems, managing our risks. We're doing that. The Bay Area is doing it. The city of Burlington is doing it. Toronto is doing it. We are preparing to make ourselves safe and resilient to the impacts that we can no longer avoid. And we can talk about this. So when climate changes and we get worried, here's where we break the cycle. Instead of dumping more scary data on people, what do? We share how it affects us in the places where we live and positive, constructive solutions. People feel empowered, and that's when action results. As neuroscience says, to quote Tali Sherrod again, our brain is built to associate forward action with the reward, not avoiding harm. So reframe your message so the information you provide induces what? Hope, not dread. Who is the best person to have this conversation? It turns out it's not me. It is you. The more we trust the person, the more concerned we feel about climate change. Friends and family are the #1 most effective people to have that conversation. And if you want to say, okay, all right, I'm convinced, but how do I do it? I have a TED Talk about that. And this was not my TED Talk. So my TED Talk actually goes through and says, here are the steps. Figure out what you have in common, connect the dots to how climate change affects that, talk about positive solutions. And you know what? I even wrote a Chatelaine magazine essay about it too. And I'll put the links to both of those in the chat for you as well if you want to check them out. So these are 2 resources I'm going to leave with you on how to have these tough conversations. But what I want to tell you is every single person can make a difference. And the biggest way we can make a difference is by using all of our voices to advocate for sensible change. That is how we change the system. People are not hearing enough about climate change, but if we overload them with doom and gloom, it just paralyzes them. And guilt-based solutions just turn people off. So instead, we want to share why climate change matters in ways that are here, now, and relevant, and solutions that make sense. So people want to hear more about that, and that we have these conversations, and these conversations really, truly do make a difference. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And we are going to be taking your questions now. We already have a ton of them. Let's dive right in because we just have 6 minutes here. So we're going to do a speed round of questions. Here we go. Just a second here. All right. What would I say is the best thing we can do personally to make a difference? I think I've already answered that, but I'm going to answer that again. Using our voices to share why it matters and what we can do to fix it and to advocate for change at every level is absolutely essential. Like what? Well, you are part of what? You're part of a business or an organization or a nonprofit. You might be part of a school or a university or a place of worship. You might be part of a Kiwanis club or a Rotary club or another type of organization. You might be a parent at your kid's school. You might be a teacher. You might work for the city. You might work for the township. You might work for the province. Whoever you are, you have a voice that you can use to advocate for change. And that is the single most important thing everyone can do. Do I think the government's doing enough about the climate crisis? Well, honestly, there's no magic threshold that if we meet this, we'll all be okay, because some aspects of climate change are already here today. But we can avoid the worst of them. We absolutely can. In fact, my research shows this. By making smart choices today to stop being so wasteful with our energy and our food, we waste more than 60% of our energy and over 50% of the food we produce. We can be more efficient and we can switch to clean energy. That's had a few bumps here in Ontario, the transition to clean energy, but we must do it because using fossil fuels harms us today. Did you know that 8 million people around the world die every year from fossil fuel air pollution? 8 million. And we're at about, I think, 2.5 million COVID deaths this year. Using fossil fuels harms us all. And climate change affects us, even in the north. So we need to build resilience to the impacts we can no longer avoid. We need to accelerate the transition to clean energy. We as a province need to partner with the federal government. And of course, we were one of the provinces that had a price on carbon before it became a federal policy. And we need to do everything we can because we are the ones at risk. We are not doing this for our great-grandchildren. We're doing it for us and for our kids. We're not doing it for the polar bears. We're doing it for us and for our kids. We're not doing it for people who live on the other side of the world alone. We're doing it for us here in Southern Ontario and our kids. So whenever anybody says, are we doing enough? I say, you know what? If we put our mind to it, I bet we could figure out something more we could do. Because every additional ton of carbon we produce carries a price tag with it. And how much is too much? Cutting it as much as possible, as soon as possible, is going to be best for us all. All right, so a couple more minutes. Why is the conversation about climate change more advanced in Europe? Well, for one thing, in Europe, they don't have quite as well-funded and organized a denial machine as they do in the United States, and a little bit in Canada too. And of course, we get a lot of US news, so a lot of that trickles across the border. There's a really fascinating book and movie called Merchants of Doubt. Merchants of Doubt. And if you check it out, it actually explains how the fossil fuel industry has systematically invested in the last 40 years to muddy the waters on climate change and delay climate action as long as possible. And this just doesn't exist at the same scale in Europe. Also in Europe, they had a heat wave, a record-breaking heat wave in 2003 that was responsible for 70,000 deaths. 70,000. Far more, orders of magnitude more than 9/11, for example. And at the very cutting edge of climate science in those days, they determined that that heat wave was at least twice as likely due to climate change. So they actually had something that was here and now versus, over there and in the future happening. And they also didn't have such a well-funded, organized campaign to induce solution aversion. So both psychological distance and solution aversion were both smaller in Europe. If I had one climate change wish I could immediately change in Canada, I would love for everybody to understand that to care about climate change, we only have to be one thing. What is that? It's a human. And as far as I know, we are all humans. We live on this planet, we breathe its air, we drink its water, we eat the food that we grow from its soil, we make everything we have out of its resources. We are all humans, and that's why we care. So there's a bunch of other questions about, how do we communicate with people who don't believe in climate change, and how do we depoliticize climate change? The resources I talked about, the Chatelaine essay and the TED Talk, which I will pop in the chat here as soon as I'm done in 30 seconds, those specifically talk about those questions. But again, sharing from the heart why climate change matters to us here and now in the places where we live, and constructive positive solutions, including the really new tech solutions like carbon capture and old tech solutions like sustainable agriculture and nature-based solutions. Talking about solutions is really important because it shows us that, you know what, we really can fix this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katharine, for joining us tonight, and thank you for sharing your insights and research. We'll be speaking to 3 local experts about how we might apply these lessons in the Bay Area right after this.
HOPA's network of ports is integrated, giving Canadian industries access to the right mode of transportation at the right time. Using marine capacity on the Great Lakes to move goods smoothly and efficiently. We are investing in modern facilities and operating sustainably.
Thank you again to tonight's sponsors. I'd like to now introduce our experts. On our panel tonight, we have Tieka Newton, Membership and Domestic Policy Manager at Climate Action Network Canada, Julie Leach, Communications Manager at the Atmospheric Fund, and Dr. Dan Longboat, Associate Professor at Trent University and Director of the Indigenous Environmental Institute. The moderator for our panel tonight is the Chair of the Bay Area Climate Change Council, Richard Coruscant.
Thanks, Bianca. Thanks so much for everybody to be here. I see we almost have 300 people joining us tonight. Fantastic. It's a pleasure to join you tonight with such a fantastic group of local experts. As we get started, I want to remind our live audience members that they can submit questions to our expert panel in the Q&A box throughout this session. So let's get right to it. My first question goes to Julie. Julie, your work involves communicating climate solutions to government, media, and industry. What strategies work best for communicating these priorities to government and business leaders?
So there are 2 key strategies I use to get through to these audiences: common language and common vision. The first strategy on language is skip the jargon. It doesn't matter if I'm a technical expert or a high school student, give it to me straight. I think we're getting better as a movement at communicating climate solutions, but there's still a disconnect between what scientists and advocates are saying and what the public understands. And this is an obstacle for getting people to care about climate change and to understand that there are solutions available today. So use the data, use the science, but present it in a way that I can understand. If you're writing content, if you're writing a letter, for example, to a politician, think of the families that are going to be reading that city councilor's newsletter, or the staffer who's combing through a minister's hundreds of letters a day. And feed that politician a PR win. Give them the sound bites, the announceables that they can use to speak to their constituents. Something that people can rally behind to demonstrate that there is demand to drive that political will. And to echo Dr. Hayhoe, the second part is the vision and connecting the vision to their values. So, what excites you? I don't know if, like me, you have dreams of enabling policies for accelerating deep retrofits for energy efficiency, but more likely, you're excited by a vision of quality, healthier homes in your neighborhood, with better ventilation, with efficient cooling for our elders who live in long-term care. And then how about good local jobs, saving money for social housing providers? The list goes on. And yes, retrofits are also about getting off fossil fuels, which will make us all healthier and protect the climate. So I'll give you an example about building codes, because building codes are so exciting before you fall asleep. They are very important because, as you saw, in actually the greater region, 43% of our emissions in this region come from buildings. So if we don't get ahead of new development, we have no chance of reaching the targets. This region is forecast to grow by 3 Mississaugas by 2043. So we need to get ahead of new development. Building codes are important. An example is in the town of Whitby. City staff realized they're not going to reach targets without taking care of building inefficient buildings in the region. They put an ambitious new building standard before town council and cue a ton of local opposition from developers. So the odds were definitely stacked against them. In my work at TAF, we provided support for staff through our experience on this same issue with City of Toronto. And we provided evidence, key messages, and then grassroots groups mobilized. They took the narrative to the public. And this was led by youth, by the way. Shout out to Fridays for Futures Whitby. They painted the picture of green, local housing, and they were very successful. Residents got the message. The mayor and the council felt the support and adopted the policy unanimously. They're the only municipality in Ontario with such an ambitious standard outside of Toronto. And this was not an expensive campaign, but this win demonstrates that we can discuss, what we can discuss in simple terms at the kitchen table, and to really show the vision of the local impacts. This can have an immediate and long-term impact on carbon.
Excellent, Julie. Thanks very much. Some really good advice there. And I think BACC's going to be coming to visit you at TAF to pick up some of those ideas and get you to work with us, because the building code issue is a big issue for all of us in different municipalities. So thanks very much for that. We're going to go to Tieka next. Tieka, your work involves building relationships with diverse groups to push for climate action. In your experience, how can climate advocates build better bridges with communities and stakeholders who mistrust the climate movement?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like it's one that Katharine did a great job of answering, talking at a high level about how we do this bridge building work across countries and in local communities at that whole range of scales. I actually feel fairly fortunate that the work that I do with Climate Action Network Canada doesn't really have me having to do a lot of that kind of engagement with those who mistrust the climate movement. But I do encounter that often in my real day-to-day life. And it certainly is something that has marked my career as a climate activist prior to my time with Climate Action Network. So I was reflecting on this question earlier in the day, and I was thinking that, one of the more interesting aspects of living through this experience of the escalating climate crisis is that although many decades ago, the whole idea seemed a bit distant and theoretical, restricted to the realm of science, today, I think a lot of us actually are starting to internalize the reality of climate change and the ways that it impacts literally every aspect of our lives. We recognize that the whole social and ecological life support system that supports us is changing under the influences of a changing climate. It's obviously affecting weather, it's affecting food security, human migration, geopolitics, access to adequate shelter. There's no longer any community or any group that's untouched by climate change in some way, including right here at home. But that said, that doesn't necessarily mean that every community and every group recognizes those climate impacts on their doorstep for what they are. And it certainly doesn't mean that everybody is eager to talk about climate change right away. But whether people want to talk about it or not, they're implicated in it. Every single one of us has a moral and ethical responsibility to the rest of humanity and the rest of life on this planet to try to do something to stop making problems worse. And ideally, we try to pitch in to help resolve and remedy climate change problems. I've come to learn that when we're trying to engage people in climate action, it really is all about building relationships. It's about cultivating trust and doing just really basic fundamental work to knit us together across commonalities as a social species. And I think first and foremost, we all need to be open to listening. So really listening means setting aside bias and personal opinions. It means listening to what a person has to share. And from there, it's almost always possible to find some thread that connects us. Once we have that common thread, we have the kernel of a relationship, and the relationship is the key to everything. So I was trying to think of a good example for where I've applied this. So I live in Northwestern Ontario. I don't live in the Bay Area. I was one of those green dots up in Northern Ontario. I actually live in Kenora. It's a small town of about 15,000 people at the north end of Lake of the Woods. We're about 50 kilometers east of the Manitoba border. So very far end of the province. at a high level, the place where I live still seems pretty much unchanged from how it was when I was a little kid. We still have 4 seasons here, and the same activities are still popular each season as they were when I was a kid growing up in the late 70s and early 80s. The vast majority of people here spend their summers in boats on the lake. We go fishing and swimming and camping. In the fall, lots of people go hunting, and winter is when we go skiing and ice fishing, and engage in lots of snowmobiling. But if you look closely, there are already a lot of changes afoot. We now get rain in January fairly often. When I was a kid, Januaries were solidly -20 all month. The ice roads go in later each fall, and they're a lot less reliable. Already this week, the ice roads are not drivable in some parts of our region. We have a full month less ice cover than we did 4 decades ago. And when we have less ice cover, that means there's a longer growing season for aquatic plants. And so we have algae blooms now that last longer. They start earlier in the year. And algae problems end up causing water quality problems. So it's this whole cascade of impacts that we all already see and experience here. But I think even for people who reject the idea of climate change, they still experience these climate change impacts. And you can use the ways that they see these impacts in the places that they love and care about to spark those conversations about common concerns, common fears, and common aspirations. So you can find ways to establish that rapport with people. I've been successful in doing this in the context of pipeline campaigns. I once ran a campaign to oppose a pipeline and met a lot of resistance from people who had vested interests in that project or that industry. But when we started to actually talk face to face and understand that we had common interest in caring about the place where we lived, we were often able to put aside some of the polarization that we brought to the issue, and we were able to actually listen and learn from one another. I think it's really important to be able to do that kind of listening, that kind of deep listening. It takes a lot of care. It takes attention. It takes patience. It takes forgiveness and willingness to set aside judgments and opinions. It means making yourself vulnerable sometimes. But it's so valuable because it helps you to build rapport with other people. And from that, you can eventually generate trust. And when you have trust, then you start building accountability to one another. And accountability is the process that helps us bring forward empathy. It's the basis of building community, and it's the foundation of our society when it functions well. I think it's really important to emphasize finally that when we learn how to work together and be more accommodating of one another, it makes us more inclined to welcome in diversity. Diversity of perspectives is where the real magic in climate action comes from. From diversity, we get new ideas, we get novel creations, and best of all, we get new possibilities for solutions. I think the last thought that I want to share with you is that when I'm talking about building relationships and building trust among people, it's actually not just even about building those relationships with people. It's building that relationship of trust with the entire world that's around you. If you listen and engage with the natural world that surrounds you, it has things to tell you too. And you can build up those relationships of trust and accountability there as well. And that can provide really powerful grounding and like fodder for giving you the energy and the vitality and the stamina to keep at it, because you know that you're caring for something and expressing that care in a way that it matters. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many benefits that come from that process of really being vulnerable and open to building relationships of trust. It's not just that we solve the climate crisis, but like it enriches every aspect of our lives. So yeah.
Excellent, Tieka. Thanks very much. You know, that
Thanks.
fits nicely in with what Katharine talked about. And certainly the whole idea of relationships is very important for all of us at BACC, because we see the vehicle forward is really through those relationships we can build with our partners in the community and helping work together and finding ways to find solutions. So excellent stuff. And I know what you're saying will fit nicely in with Dan, because Dan, for you, we know that you're known for your ability to combine traditional Indigenous teachings with Western science. What do these teachings tell us about how we need to respond to the climate crisis?
Good. Thank you for that, Richard. And thank you. It's so nice to be here with all of you tonight. So, Sewa Guego, greetings, everyone. Ayamos G Sewa Dakaridi, Dona Sawatsanuni, Dona Guego Scano, and hope that everybody is happy, healthy, and at peace. So great to be here. Thank you. I guess it's a big question, and we've only got a short period of time to answer it. So let me kind of just throw some ideas forward for you. A lot of times, we think about the idea of teachings and what they provide for us. And a lot of times, our knowledge systems as Indigenous peoples has kind of been relegated to the margins. Oftentimes, discounted and really kind of set aside to the point where it becomes non-existent in the larger discussions of the day, be they, climate, economy, politics, just about every issue. So now is a good time to bring ideas together. No time in human history, when we look back, any time in human history, have we had the opportunity to address the complexity of issues that we're facing right now. No other time have we had so many threats to our continued existence as human beings, to food, to pandemics, and many pandemics prior to this one and many after. As well as many of the other aspects that are impacting us on a daily basis, threats to our water quality, quantity, the loss of biodiversity, the extinctions of species, et cetera, you know them all under the umbrella of climate change. We've never had to face this complexity before. This complexity really demands a broader range and a deeper understanding and a deeper way of thinking about the world. And really, that's where an Indigenous knowledge comes forward. And again, no disrespect intended, but when you begin to look at science and the Western way of engaging with the world, it's predicated, on mainly a male way of seeing the world for the most part until recently. And because of that, it has exuded sort of the male psyche. That lack of kind of understanding and the lack of engagement with having a singular vision. And I like the way that my good friend Albert Marshall oftentimes talks about it when he talks about this idea of two-eyed seeing. So, it's just like us as human beings, we can walk around and cover up one eye and we can get along and we can manage okay, but we're going to bang into a few things. But when we have two-eyed seeing, we have a broader, richer, deeper understanding and engagement with the world around us. And so what we're talking about when we talk about Indigenous knowledge, it's really the understanding when we understand the past, when we understand the present, we're better to understand the future. So when you engage that 360-degree vision of the world, it creates a completely different context. But when you really engage Indigenous knowledge and you understand that this physical world is wrapped and empowered by a spiritual world, a world of energy, if you will, then, when you bring those two together, then you've got a 720-degree vision. And that's the kind of vision I think that we need to develop in the world to tackle the problems that are in front of us. So I think the unique opportunity when we talk about reconciliation and the recognition of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledge, and you look around at many of your colleagues, that have engaged with community, much to their success, and enlightened scientists around the world, in many different aspects, there's new ideas coming forward. And as both Tieka and Julie and Katharine have talked about this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, I should say, the idea behind it is that bringing these ideas forward really creates an opportunity for innovation. And when you think about, that Chinese symbol that they use for challenges, on the other side of that, they talk about that it's opportunity. I think we're at the crux of a unique opportunity that when we engage in a multitude of different perspectives, we have a richer, deeper understanding of the problems, and through that process, have a richer, deeper understanding of the nature of the solutions that we have to create. Katharine talked about, many of the scientists that have gone on in the 1820s. Well, we have our own scientists, and one of the leading proponents that provided climate change information for us was a man that we refer to as Scanyat Dario. His name is a Seneca, and his name is Handsome Lake, and he received a number of visions from spiritual visions from the four beings. They provided a way for him to kind of understand and talk about the world. And then way back in 1790s, he was talking about what was going to come forward. And in that teachings of recognizing the fragility of the natural world, he talked about waters that would burn, trees that would die from the top down, the extinctions of species, plants that would no longer grow, the heating of the earth because of the activities of human beings. And he then talked about sickness and diseases, winds, fires that would happen. All of these different pieces, you know, through prophecies. And that's only one prophecy of, you know, us as the Haudenosaunee. Many other nations, indigenous nations around the world also share the similar prophecies that tell us then about, you know, engaging with and understanding the world around us and what's ahead of us. But engaged in many of those prophetic pieces are survival strategies as well that tells us how to get through these next times. So I think that, you know, we are in a really unique time and a really unique opportunity in human history to reach out, you know, and to touch hands with one another. And let me close with this. I'll tell you, one of my great friends, Norma General from Grand River, Six Nations, she said to me one time, she says, and you can imagine this, she says, when you see, and all of us, imagine a beautiful forest, beautiful trees, all kinds of different trees that are in there. Not one kind of tree is the same. Pine trees, maple trees, apple trees, you know, oak trees, poplars, birch, all types of trees. And in that, they bring in all types of insects and animals and birds, all living together, plants and medicines, all living together. And it's as though she says, if we had the power as human beings to roll back the earth, she said, we would see that all of those trees, their roots are touching. She said, it's just like they're holding hands. It's like, oh man, look how beautiful that is. And then she says this is the opportunity for us as human beings now to touch hands together, to hold hands. And she says, and work for the continuation of life. And it's like, oh man, it's right there. So our teachings and our ways of understanding the world are ages old. They come from not just the minds of human beings, but they come from a place of spirit and have helped thousands of generations of our people to not only survive in the world, but actually to flourish as civilizations. And now, you know, we have the opportunity to understand what's coming in and coming forward and how to prepare for it and how to get through these next times. So I want to thank you for that. So I'll turn it back over to you, Richard.
Great. Thanks, Dan. You know, I love that analogy. I mean, it's just so perfect in terms of thinking, when you think about it, how we all need to kind of come together and how we need to take advantage of that Indigenous knowledge and partner with the Indigenous communities in all of our neighborhoods, right? I think it's really important that we kind of start getting focused on that. I'm going to pose a question to all of you. I want you to just take a few minutes, like probably a minute, to kind of respond. I want to try and get through a few of these, but I would like all of you to take a crack at it. What do we do when politicians say that the public is distracted by COVID, so urgency is not important right now? Start with Julie.
Sure. So I do think it's important to recognize that in this moment we need to respond to the current emergency of the COVID crisis and attend to the emergency response. So I think there's some legitimacy to questioning where priorities are. But let's be realistic about budgets. Budgets are strapped and things are tight. But now we have this opportunity to build back better. Governments, all levels of government, are putting tremendous efforts into rebuilding the economy by focus on investing in infrastructure and jobs. So we need to make sure that when we're building that infrastructure, we're not locking in the old ways. We're working towards a recovery that is inclusive, that creates good jobs locally for Canadians, but that also reduces carbon at the same time and certainly doesn't lock in carbon intensive decisions. So I think there is an openness emerging right now to sort of a new economy in the pandemic context. I think we have an opportunity to leverage this moment to speak to our politicians about where our priorities are and that we need to make sure climate is, that we're addressing climate solutions when we're trying to address the economic situation and the health situation as well. These crises are inextricably linked.
And those crises create opportunity at the same time, right?
Yeah.
How about Tieka?
Yeah, I think Julie's right. I mean, there's definitely justification for addressing the immediate needs of the COVID crisis. No one in the climate movement would argue that. It has definitely impacted many, many people, all of us, in some way. So it's certainly appropriate to divert some energy and focus toward addressing the immediacy there. But that said, one of the things that we've really seen in the last year is what governments are capable of doing in a moment of true crisis. You know, we have more than 400, 500 communities across Canada that have declared climate emergencies. And yet we do not see the level of marshaling of resources to the same scale that we've seen with COVID. COVID has shown us what is possible. It's also showed us a lot of places where there are gaps in our social safety net, in our social conventions and contracts and constructs, places where some injections of thoughtful redesign would go a long way to meeting social needs, but also meeting climate needs. So I'm talking about things like housing and shelter, as we address problems related to healthcare and equity and access to vaccines, and whether a community has access to safe, clean drinking water. You know, there are so many elements of the ways that COVID has impacted vulnerable communities that if we address solving those problems, we're also contributing potentially in really beneficial ways to solving the climate crisis. So I don't think that it's necessary to say that we're parking all climate action while responding to COVID. And certainly, as Julie said, this the year or years ahead of post-COVID recovery are like a once in a lifetime opportunity to really rebuild thoughtfully.
Excellent. Okay, Dan, thoughts, please.
Oh boy. So I heard somebody talk about this the other day, and they were talking about this idea that it's the world kind of talking to us. And they said that if you don't want to pay attention to the big things like climate change, then maybe you'll pay attention to the small things like a little virus. It's beginning to ask us to be able to change the way we see ourselves and how we see each other and how our connection to the natural world. When you see, you know, I guess really the impacts of climate change on a global scale, and you see the impacts of you know, climatic weather events that, you know, cause both environmental destruction and human degradation and destruction as well. You see that you know, the real opportunity for us to begin to kind of reflect on those things and what are we really doing and what's the result of us. There seems to be a you know, this cognitive dissonance between cause and effect, and oftentimes, you know, when you look at humankind, sometimes we're really good, you know, at this idea of understanding change. And when you look at the larger picture and you see change as a way of either, you know, when you look back at human history and you see that there's a spectrum of change, what facilitates change, it's either catastrophe or enlightenment. So you can see we're real good at this, but we're not so good at this. So it's really coming time down for us to begin a process of enlightening ourselves. And I think that a lot of the speakers tonight, you know, have spoken to the idea that, you know, we need to be better informed. I'm so happy to be able to see, you know, so many engineers, educators, and particular parents that are here, and grandparents that understand, you know, the nature of us, and understand the importance of education and learning, and being able to share and be able to create this way of doing things that necessitates a new way of kind of being in the world. And COVID, I think, has helped us to be able to understand that. So inside of, you know, even the worst things, there's always something that's positive. And when we begin to look at that and we see COVID, if anything, I mean, a good friend of mine, Kevin Deere, Kevin talks about this idea that, you know, COVID has forced us all into our own, you know, our own vision quest, if you will. It has enabled us to remove ourselves to somewhat, to reflect on really what's important in life. And I think that, you know, it's a unique opportunity to be able to see that all of these things are connected as we move around the world, you know, from water to air to land to biological life, as well as to climate change, to the economy, to new advents in technologies, to innovations that we're going to need, and to our dependence on, on ourselves and one another. And if anything, it's maybe helping us to be able to understand the importance and the privilege of being able to reach out to one another and to hold hands so that we can work for the continuation of life. Because as human beings, according to our traditions, that's imperative number one thing that we do, work for the continuation of life, not just human life, but all life. All life. That's our responsibility.
Thanks, Dan. That's a perfect way to kind of close off our panel. All of you have really provided some really great food for thought for us to work and ideas for us to work on. And from building relationships to looking at, this is a big opportunity right now for change. Lots of chances for us to kind of go and do some really good work. So let me thank each of you, Tieka, Dan, and Julie. Thanks very much for being on our panel today, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure, down the road in terms of some of the other things we want to do. And before I pass it back to Bianca, I just want, as the chair for the Bay Area Climate Change Council, I want to thank Bianca and Allison Maxted for all the hard work in putting this forum together. Without them, we couldn't have done it. So, ladies, thank you very, very much for all the hard work you've done. Over to you, Bianca.
Thanks so much, Richard. A reminder that if you'd like to stay informed on BACCC's initiatives, you can follow us on social media at BayArea_climate, or you can sign up for our e-newsletter. There are a number of people who have made tonight possible. First and foremost, thank you for watching this evening. BACCC is committed to serving the communities of Hamilton and Burlington. Your excitement for climate action sends a clear message to government decision makers. We also want to thank our sponsors. Thank you for supporting climate action in our community. Thank you as well to each of our panelists and speakers. This concludes the 2021 Bay Area Climate Forum. Thank you and good night.